Thank you, operator, and thank you, participants, for deciding to attend this training session today. We have quite a bit of information to cover in a short 1-hour time frame, so let's go ahead and get focused on interviewing skills for supervisors, strategies for conducting effective and compliant candidate interviews. First of all, when you are interviewing to hire someone to fill a job, you have to keep your interviewing goal in mind. And when you're interviewing, of course, what you're trying to do is fill an open job, but you're not trying to just get a warm body in a seat. You're trying to fill an open job with the right person at the right time for the company as well as for that individual in a position that is right for them in terms of both skill and fit. This requires a thorough knowledge of the position itself as well as the company's hiring needs. You have to know more than just what is in the help wanted ad, and sometimes you have to know more than what is in the job description, because sometimes job descriptions aren't really updated as frequently as they should be, or often companies don't even have them. It's very hard to know how to interview and select someone for a position if you don't have a very strong working knowledge of what that position entails. It can also be very beneficial to utilize a validated selection tool such as PXT Select as a tool to bridge the gap between the resume and the interview. That tool, there are some other tools as well that kind of quantify candidate skills and compare them against a performance model for the job that you're trying to fill, so they can help take some of the emotion out of the interview and also provide you with some guidelines for what to ask based on the person's cognitive and quantitative abilities and what is required for the performance model for that job. And then, of course, you also have to keep compliance in mind. Certainly when you're conducting interviews, it's important to take steps to avoid doing anything that could lead to allegations of discrimination. You definitely want to minimize that potential, and it's also important to follow any policies and procedures that are established for your company as well. Now, of course, when it comes to preventing allegations of discrimination, that requires a pretty thorough understanding of equal employment opportunity regulations. That's not our primary focus today, but we will touch very briefly on that in today's session. That's something that's really kind of its own topic. The good news, though, is that the things that you need to know in order to avoid discrimination in the interviewing and applicant screening process are also those things that are necessary for people to know in order to prevent workplace harassment and discrimination overall with people who are already working with your organization as well. Now, before you interview someone, it's very important to get prepared to conduct that interview. And even if you're a seasoned interviewer who's been doing this for a long time, each time you're filling a position, you need to step back and get prepared to conduct the interview for that job. And a good starting point, assuming that you have a job description, is to review it and make sure that you know what the specific duties of that job really are, rather than just relying on assumptions that you might make based on what others who are in the role have done. Make sure you're clear on any qualifications and requirements that are needed, and also use that information to really determine the profile of what an ideal candidate really is. I would suggest that if your job descriptions have not been updated recently, or if you know that there are issues with them, that you may want to consider putting on the to-do list, getting those job descriptions reviewed and updated. If you're interviewing people, to fill jobs, I would suggest that maybe you even spend some time interviewing people like who already do that job for your company. So interviewing in a different context, but where you get feedback from them of what they do on a regular basis. And if those job descriptions aren't really reflective of what happens in the role, that's something to consider within your organization, that those descriptions need to be changed, because really your job descriptions only help you from a recruiting perspective, a training perspective, a management perspective, and a risk management perspective if they are in fact accurate and reflective of the reality in your organization. So that's a good starting point for getting a sense of what the ideal candidate for the job for which you're trying to hire someone might really look like, or how that person might come across in an interview. But just looking at the job description isn't really enough, because it doesn't always tell the whole story. And this is something you could incorporate into those conversations that you have with people who are in the jobs now as well. Or if there aren't people who are in the jobs, maybe people who have managed that job in the past. And consider success factors. You know, what traits and